welcome to our next meeting. So this week we're going to be talking a bit about the Google Merchant Center. But before we kicked off, I thought I'd start with some general housekeeping. So one of the things, if you want to join and ask some questions, we've got the YouTube channel. I just sort of give a quick introduction to the YouTube channel. So if you go off onto our YouTube channel, under the discussion session, if you go to the discussion tab, we'll bring up topics. Now what we've found is for some reason it's not showing all the topics coming up, but if you click sort by and then newest first, it'll actually bring up various comments. And so what we're doing is we're creating a topic before the actual session. So what you can do is you can add, if you basically reply to it, if you've got any questions in advance, feel free to add them there. We'll then copy them across and merge them into the actual interview. But it's also, if you've got any topics you want to hear about, if you could just reply to that thread about future sessions, that would be great. It'll help us a lot. We want to make this useful for people who are listening in. Some other just little bits of news, some COVID related news, because we've been doing a few little tips. One is, this one's just on my blog. It's just a quick note that if you're talking to small businesses, you may like to share the idea of updating their hours in Google My Business. And the more important link is down the bottom, is a link off to the blog post, which has got the official guidance from the Google My Business team on how to update their Google My Business status, because there's some new status values available for COVID in terms of like temporarily closed and so forth. So that may be a useful resource to share around. I'm trying to we still order takeout occasionally, and I try and let the takeout places saying, hey, have you updated Google My Business? Because they've frequently got different hours, and some of them I look up and they say they're open their normal hours and then they're not, and that doesn't create a good experience. Another bit of information available is on the Webmaster Central blog, which is, there's been some changes to schema.org to introduce some new values to indicate status that they're closed or temporarily closed and so forth, particularly with events if they're deferred. And I'm not going to claim to be an expert on all the different values, but if you go off to the Google Webmaster blog, there is some useful information there on if you've got how to get your statuses and so forth visible in search and so forth. Yep, I'll leave it on there. The last one I wanted to bring up is web.dev has also got a COVID/COVID-19 page, and it talks about some information such as how do you keep your site up. If you're particularly getting hit by a lot of traffic, there's some issues about some just general advice on how to get your site more stable, accessibility information, and it's just basically got a number of links to different resources. So that may also be a useful resource. So that's web.dev/COVID-19. But what we wanted to do was get on today is, oops, don't fiddle around with the camera. We've got a guest speaker today, and I'll just jump over. Ben, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you so much, Alan. So hello, everyone. My name is Ben Kilmer. I work at Google in our shopping partnerships team, so specifically helping third-party developers build tools either for themselves or for other merchants using our content API as well as our ads API solutions, specifically around shopping.
Cool. So if anybody's got any questions, feel free to drop them into the chat, and I will do my best to merge them into the discussion. Otherwise, what I'm going to be doing is I've just prepared a few questions just to get the ball rolling. But would love to get your comments, your feedback. So if anything comes up and you want to learn more, just drop it into the chat there, and I'm keeping an eye on that. So Ben, just to start off, do you want to just give a very quick overview of the purpose of the Google Merchant Center?
Yeah, sure. So Google Merchant Center is Google's platform effectively for everything related to your store and for your products. So it allows you to update information relative to your store, whether that be your store name, website, shipping and fulfillment information, any tax information, and then also very importantly, everything around your products. And so that's where you can maintain your product feeds, make sure your product information is up to date. And additionally, for certain programs, you can interface with your orders. So for example, with shopping actions, and I might take a step back in a little bit just to describe the different programs that Merchant Center supports. But with shopping actions, you can also manage your orders within Google Merchant Center. Additionally, you can enroll in these different programs. So the larger programs that we see nowadays, one is Surfaces Across Google, which is effectively all the unpaid experiences that Google offers for you to feature your products across Google Search, Image Search, Google Shopping Properties, etc. Shopping Ads, which presumably many of you are familiar with. This is our paid solution, where it's an ad unit. You click that ad unit, it typically goes to your website. And then lastly, Shopping Actions. And this is where the transaction actually occurs on a Google property, and then that order information is then sent to you. And all those different programs can be enrolled and managed as well within Google Merchant Center. And lastly, Google Merchant Center is also a place for insights. So we're continuing to kind of evolve the functionality of Merchant Center, but we want to continue to kind of grow the number of insights that you can gain directly within Merchant Center, whether that's pricing information, understanding how competitively your products are priced, as well as potentially assortment and other merchandising information for you to understand what trends might be happening, how your products are being sold, and what might be future opportunities for you as a retailer. So those are typically everything that you can kind of do in Merchant Center.
Cool. There's one comment in the chat. So he says he's got a Shopify store. They're doing well with organic traffic and Facebook ads. What was that product mentioned? But anyway, yep, there's lots of other ad platforms around as well. But I was just wondering, could you expand on a little bit on the organic traffic and the relevance of Google Merchant Center for organic?
Yeah, great question. There've actually been, I believe, a blog post maybe over the past month or two, as well as some updated Help Center content. So I believe currently in the US, we just announced that there's going to be some new experiences coming specific around unpaid experiences and programs, and we're calling these Surfaces Across Google. In effect, your products can be listed across different kind of surfaces and platforms across Google, whether that be Google Search, Image Search, or again, the Google Shopping Property, and potentially other platforms as well into the future. And what that looks like is effectively richer data than where we've historically kind of presented. So historically, Google search results are kind of, your blue links, maybe some extension information below that. But what we have coming up is kind of richer product data around that. So some of your product details, and this is an opportunity for you to basically receive traffic that's unpaid in a much richer form than that you have in the past. And so if you see a program in Merchant Center called Surfaces Across Google, that's what that's referring to. If you just do a Google search for Surfaces Across Google, you can probably come across our blog posts in Help Center, which have more information around that.
Well, I might give that one a bit of a batch, because we had a question about the same sort of thing, is if they wanted to get going with Google Merchant Center with ads, where was the best place? And is that Surfaces Across Google? Is that the best query to do?
Yeah, so you'll effectively enroll yourself into different programs. And so one program, again, is Shopping Ads, another Surfaces Across Google, and Shopping Actions was the other one that I discussed. A great place to start is Surfaces Across Google. What that will effectively, that allows you to kind of test the waters as well with Google Merchant Center. So get all your products, get your business information synced. And then that also allows you to discover if there are any account level issues or potentially product level issues that you need to resolve. Once you resolve those, depending on your goals as a merchant, you can also enroll in other programs then, such as Shopping Ads or Shopping Actions. But Surfaces Across Google is certainly a great place to start.
Cool. I'm actually just trying to find it here myself. We've got show products across Google Surfaces, and it's got some information there. So Google Merchant Center Help, that is the best place to go to. If you're on that, then you know you're in the right sort of place. There's a whole lot of information. Google search is always what I normally go to. Okay, so there are some other questions, and we'll go to the questions because they're a lot more fun. So what's the best place to do this? On to the next question. We also export the products to Shopify. There's a dozen or so columns that we need to fill those in. And so there's a question of like all the attributes. So there's a dozen or so columns that are blank. Do we need to fill those in, or will Google pull them from the Shopify fields? This may be more of a question for the particular extension you're using, is my guess. Certainly the different platforms, and Ben, you can come in and correct me if I'm wrong, but the different platforms have different sorts of attributes they pull in. And so like I used to be at eBay, and I know that eBay and Amazon had quite different metadata, and so sometimes you had to worry about making sure you had the metadata for the right platform. And there was no magic. Sometimes the metadata was in one format for one and the incorrect from the other one. But looks like you want to say something, Ben. Do you want to jump in?
Yeah. So to your point, there are integrations with a number of third-party platforms, whether that be Shopify, WooCommerce, BigCommerce, PrestaShop, all the kind of major platforms out there. There's a pretty healthy kind of ecosystem of extensions and add-ons. What you'll want to check, so basically Google Merchant Center has a number of different attributes. Some are required for the particular product, and that might be regional specific as well. And some are optional. And what you'll want to make sure is for the Google or for the shopping programs that you're enrolled in and for your region for that particular product, that you have at a minimum all the required information for that product for it to be kind of approved for that particular program. And you can check that within Merchant Center. There should be kind of a feed diagnostics, I believe, tab that should highlight if there is any missing information. If you do need to augment what an integration is providing, you can create what we consider a supplemental feed. And all that does is append information to the feed that the app you might be using is already providing. And so to kind of take a step back, would recommend you go to Google Merchant Center, see if there are errors that are appearing. If there are, go ahead and see how you can best resolve those. That might be maybe business information that's missing, or if it's product information that is unable to be synced by the app that you're using, you can always look into a supplemental feed. Alternatively, you can also look at if you can provide that information for the app to automatically pull on your behalf. And so, for example, in Shopify, within their app, if there are certain pieces of information that you can upload directly within Shopify, that might be easiest just to create kind of a consistent sync. But alternatively, if you're unable to do that, you can also look into a supplemental feed.
Cool. Just running through the questions in the chat session. Is this advice specific for brands only, or is it for merchants in general? I guess is the alternative.
For both. For brands or manufacturers, we also have something called Manufacturer Center, which is where you can upload your product data. It's a slightly different process, but the general idea being that's where you can keep data specific to your brands that gives Google kind of a richer idea of what those attributes should be that we can then kind of use as a source of truth, I guess, as other merchants might be selling those products. So if you are a brand, I would recommend also looking into Manufacturer Center, where you can kind of provide Google the kind of that ground truth set of data. If you're a retailer, you're probably using Merchant Center specifically, where you can include information like your business information, fulfillment information, things like that.
Cool. So we've got another question here. It's actually a two-part chat. So that the first one, he was saying he's got a Shopify store. He's been in Google Merchant Center. It got suspended. But the real question, I think, is can you describe the process by which feeds are evaluated by Google Merchant Center? How does a suspension occur at the account level versus the product level?
Sure. So Google has a number of policies specific to shopping that can either be account level requirements or product specific. So for account level, and There's a lot of content on this, so I'm not going to be able to be fully comprehensive in my comments here, but common reasons that we find accounts are suspended, for example, is insufficient contact information. Typically, you need 2 of the 3 of either phone number, address, or email listed on your website. And frequently, merchants might just have a contact me form, which isn't really kind of applicable to our requirements. That's really common. Another really common trip up is the return policy page has to occur pre-checkout. Meaning if someone goes to your website, they need to be able to review your return policy before they enter the checkout flow. Those 2, I would say, are probably our most common account level suspension reasons. Obviously, there are a number of other potential reasons. If you do need to, what I would recommend though, is you go in Merchant Center to understand what that reasoning is. And typically there's a link that's provided to how to best address that. And again, it's going to depend in terms of what your actual suspension reason is. Additionally, and if your account's suspended, effectively all your products are disapproved at that point. So you're unable to really move forward with the different programs. If it's a product suspension issue, then it might just be updating a particular attribute, or let's say, your website says that product is currently unavailable, yet that's not reflected within Merchant Center. Then it might just be updating those settings to correctly reflect the product availability.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like to diagnose the problem, though, the first thing to do is to go to the Google Merchant Center console and look for any errors or any advice that was given through there, and then follow through the instructions from there.
Correct. And you should be able to request a re-review as well. And I think as part of this question that I didn't quite get to is kind of what's our review process. So when a new account is created, it goes through a review process, which can take up to a few days. And in that process, there's certain website checks as well as feed checks, et cetera. And that's typically will look at a holistic review of you as a merchant. And so if you're disapproved during that process, that's where you want to kind of diagnose what was the reason, address that reason, and then potentially request for re-review at that time.
Cool, thank you. Well, we're getting more comments on the chat, so thank you very much. This is great. This is the whole purpose of this, is to actually get your answers. I've got some backup questions, but I'd much rather get answers to your questions. So, we've got a multi-part one. If you can keep the questions short, it just makes them easier to bring up. But it's just saying, selling dietary supplementals are prohibited according to... I got too many windows all over my screen. It's not readable. I'm going to have to move it up here. I've got to use this software better. So I'm going to actually jump through to the end. Everyone, the comp lists. I'm actually trying to work out what the question is here. I should have brought that up before. One day a product is approved, the next day it becomes disapproved. There's definitely no pattern. Every feed upload, I get a random number of products disapproved. Is there any advice you've got to handle that sort of a situation?
So I'll clarify saying that our review processes are not perfect. We're definitely evolving them and trying to improve them. But there is definitely potential for inconsistency. And obviously we try to minimize that. But I do apologize if you're frustrated by inconsistencies or if it's not clear why your products are disapproved. Without knowing kind of the specifics of your case, I would recommend trying to understand what the policies for those disapproved products are. There might be a case, I'm not saying necessarily applies in your example, but where we're just having to catch a number of products that are being disapproved, but what potentially we're not looking through all the products, which is why not all of them are being disapproved. But what I would recommend doing is seeing if there are any patterns in terms of the disapproval reasons, and just trying to go after kind of the core issues that we're highlighting. But again, I apologize, without knowing kind of the individual account, unable to provide kind of more tailored guidance.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I mean, we'll do our best to get questions answered, but we're not volunteering to do live diagnostics of individual cases on these calls. It just gets too hard, and obviously can't bring it up on the screen either for privacy and so forth reasons. But we'll do our best. But it sounds like, again, go through the Google Merchant Center, see what other data. Is there any sort of like fallback approach? If they can't work out what's going on just by reading Google Merchant Center, are there any forums they can go to, or are there recommended contacts for the next stage?
Yeah, there is the, I believe there is a content API forum, I believe, where we do have Google folks as well as, I believe, other kind of third-party experts chime in resolving issues. I would say those are, from what I can tell, mostly technical kind of in nature. If it's more policy specific, that's probably where you will want to reach out with your Google account rep if you have one, or if you're using an agency and they have a representative, go through them. Alternatively, you can reach out through Google Ads help as well to see if you can get some resolution there. I believe we do have a support team within Google Ads that you can call, email, to follow up with some of the more kind of specific policies that might apply in your case.
Cool. Well, thank you for taking some of the tougher sorts of questions that we sort of get here. They're not easy ones, and you know, I understand the pain that merchants have, and what we're trying to do is provide the best possible experience to customers as well. And so it's just hard at the volume sometimes to get it right all of the time. Okay, well, feel free to bring up any other questions in the chat. Otherwise, I'm going to keep going with some of my pre-canned queries. How can I sync my products to Google Merchant Center? What are the mechanisms available?
Cool. So there are a number of different ways you can do so. One is you can actually just create your products now manually within Merchant Center. And I believe this functionality came out relatively recently. But you can actually just create products individually directly within the Google Merchant Center front end, which is probably one of the simpler ways. Alternatively, you can also create a feed. And there are a number of different ways that you can create a product feed. One is via website crawl. So we have something called automated feed. So effectively, if your website is set up in a structured manner, according to kind of the schema.org framework, you can elect for Google to actually just crawl your website and pull data. So if you are able to structure your website accordingly, that's a really kind of fast and seamless and somewhat light way for you to provide your product data to Google. Alternatively, you can use Google Sheets, set up a scheduled fetch, a file upload, or use the Content API. And in using the Content API, you can either do so yourself if you have the technical resources and knowledge, or otherwise you can use a third-party integration, such as a number of add-ons that we see on these platforms like Shopify, Magento, Ecommerce, etc. Or if you have an agency or maybe a feed management company, they might be using the Content API as well on your behalf.
Cool. You mentioned a number of extensions. And I think I already know the answer to this one, but just to confirm, we don't have a sort of necessarily a recommended list of extensions per platform at the moment, do we?
No, we don't have recommended extensions, nor, to my knowledge, we don't have Google built ones. I believe we have in the past, but no longer. However, we do have Google teams that are working with a lot of these third-party developers, making sure they have access to kind of the latest and greatest betas, as well as some kind of technical guidance as they build these integrations. So we definitely recommend looking at them. Honestly, if you just go through the reviews, you probably get a pretty good sense of which ones stand out versus which ones have problems. But we're not able to officially kind of endorse any of these integrations.
Cool. That's what I thought you would say. Another question from the chat. How often do we visit a product page for website crawling?
Ooh, that's a good question. No, I'm going to say I don't know off the top of my head. We might have Help Center material around that. I would suspect it might not be totally consistent for every web page, in that like maybe it's not every 24 hours, etc. So I don't know what those periodic periods would be. I'd have to check Help Center myself. Sorry.
Yeah, and I think also my understanding is that by using feeds, you can actually get the data updated more rapidly, and that's one of the advantages of using feeds. And so it's actually feeds and the crawler that often work together, and part of that, my understanding, is to check that people aren't trying to game the system. They're not sort of saying via the feeds, oh, it's $10, and on the website it's $1. And so you get more traffic, and then you turn out it's just being malicious. And so often my understanding is the feeds are a great way to get the data through more rapidly, and the content API, I assume, even faster. Maybe you can comment on that one. But the web crawling is also there as a backup. But if you really want fast updates, feeds would seem to be the way to go, or the content API.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. They do complement each other. In fact, we do have regular crawls kind of verifying the information that's uploaded via the content API. I don't know exactly how quickly content API information is kind of processed within our systems and directly reflected on the shopping programs, but I do believe it's typically within a matter of hours. There's probably some differences depending on the size of your feed, et cetera. But I believe it is relatively quickly, and probably much quicker than it would be through our regular crawls. Meaning, if suddenly a product is unavailable, updating that via the content API is probably a very quick way to get that information passed through our systems.
Yeah, that's consistent with my understanding as well, because the crawls, I don't think there is a single schedule. I think it is partly based on popularity of site, and I think it also feeds into the general Googlebot crawler, so it's not like completely in the control of the content team. But we get the different sources, and we cross-validate and cross-check, is my understanding as well. Okay, we've got another question. Thank you very much from the chat. The examples just mentioned, the content API and manually add your own products with third-party integrations, are they all treated the same, or is one preferred or has a better chance of being approved?
We have a consistent review process, regardless of how a product or an offer or a product is submitted or account is created. So there is no difference in terms of likelihood of being approved, et cetera. Whether you're going yourself through Google Merchant Center, through our front ends, or creating via the content API, or using a third-party extension. So we as Google are fairly agnostic in terms of what we support. Whatever is easiest for you as a merchant to get your account created, configured, and your product synced.
Yeah, my understanding is the same, and it's more a matter of how fresh, like how rapidly you can get it to site is more of an issue. The review process is there's no difference.
Right.
Cool. So you mentioned the content API a little bit already, but is there anything else you want to refer to, like where it fits into the picture, the content API itself, compared to like feeds?
Sure. The content API, I would say, is a bit more comprehensive than just product feeds. So again, you can use it for everything from creating a Merchant Center account to configuring your business information and settings, as well as your product data, and then also managing orders through shopping actions, and also gaining insights around pricing, assortment, et cetera. I wouldn't say there's necessarily always parity between our front-end solutions and the API, but I think that's something that we generally strive for. The content API, I would say, in terms of kind of like the overall picture, is just one mechanism for you to provide information to Google and also pull potentially some information. But again, it really depends on your use case, whether that's the best solution for you or whether you're better off using a third party who might be using the content API on your behalf, or just using our front end solutions.
Is there any, like if I'm a developer, how would they choose between the content API and other feeds?
I think some of it would come down to what information you have available yourself as a developer. So, for example, if you have access to the merchant's website as well as product data, whatever that feed might look like in its raw form, content API might be a really easy mechanism for you to provide that data to Google. as well as in order to set up a Merchant Center account, you also need to verify and claim your website. And that verification can be done via a different API at Google called the Site Verification API. But all those processes can be done programmatically, as well if you're managing a large number of accounts. So for example, you're working in an agency or you're working at one of these e-commerce platforms, would highly recommend you look into the Content API. It's just much easier to manage at scale. You can make sure the product information is fresh, your products aren't expiring. You can effectively do the majority of required functionality that you need to set up, configure, manage, and report on these Merchant Center accounts. That can all be done, or for the most part, can be done via the Content API. And so I would recommend you look into that if you're managing at scale as well.
Cool. Well, we've got another question from the chat, which is how important is it to add the Google product category to the feeds?
It's useful information for Google. I think it gives us some better context around the product. However, I don't believe, I hope I'm not shooting myself in the foot here, I don't believe it's required. And so useful if you have it. I wouldn't overthink it too much either. We have a kind of a rich catalog in our own backend through Manufacturer Center and other kind of crawling techniques. But if you have that information, great. What is also very useful, though, especially if you have it and it applies to the product, is any unique identifier information. And so, it's if you have the GTIN value, manufacturer part number, or MPN, and/or brand, that information is very useful to us because that helps us kind of better match the product against our catalog information. And I believe, depending on the type of product, that might be required information as well. So if you have the unique product identifier, I would highly recommend you sync that. Product category, if it's available, great. If not, I wouldn't worry too much about it.
Yeah, and I should say that no, Ben's graciously joined the call, but he doesn't know everything of every single field in Merchant Center. So
very true. Yeah.
There's a lot. There is a lot to know, and my understanding in this particular area is the more that Google, like as Ben said, Google tries to work out the product category itself, and we've got various sources of information to do that. And you can imagine that if we know the right category, like when you get into organic search, there are different experiences that come up. And so if we know that it's an apparel experience, the search results may be formatted in a slightly different way than if it's a toasters. And so we can try and do more with it if the better we understand the data and the more reliable it is. And so by providing that information, it's more likely to be correct. It doesn't mean that Google will get it wrong, but we've got to try and work out the category to work out what experience it should be surfaced in. And so it's all a question of data reliability. I would be saying put it in whenever you can, because it's more likely to be reliable. But the ultimate source of truth for these sorts of questions, I think, is going through the Help Center. We're giving our opinions, but the Help Center has been verified and validated to be 100% correct, rather than us doing things live off the top of our head. Anything you want to add to that one, Ben?
No, I think you're spot on that. The other bit I would add is that we do have our catalog as well. And so we are kind of trying to match what you submit with what we know about these products. And the more you can help us do that, the better. To your point, there are different kind of experiences depending on product category, maybe other attributes. And the better we can the more we know about your products, the better we can help surface that, and ultimately the better performance that you're going to see.
Yeah, and we've got another question from the chat, which was, how do you process or evaluate custom products that do not have an MPN or barcode?
So I believe that in the Content API, or there should be an attribute called identifier exists, and that allows you to indicate that it is a custom product. And so if there indeed is no barcode, GTIN, MPN number, that's totally fine. Those products are also eligible for different shopping programs. you would just want to let Google know that it is a custom product using that identifier exists attribute. And once you use that attribute, then don't submit like a made-up number for your GTIN or MPN. Just don't submit anything at all. As long as you select identifier exists equal to false, you should be fine.
Oh, we've got another question from the chat. Does the provided image have to be published on the landing page? So if you've got a product landing page, does it the image you give to the merchant center? And I don't have a clue to this one. So if I was going to make my guess, because you can have multiple images and you normally have a product gallery on a product page, it probably doesn't have to be the landing one, would be my guess, but I'm really not sure. I can see, Ben, that might be one we have to take off and get an answer for you later, but you want to have your best shot, Ben?
My best guess is the same as yours. I don't think they have to match. I don't think they have to match. I could see as a consumer, you might want a consistent experience. But I historically haven't seen many disapprovals for that reason, at least. But we would definitely need to confirm in the Help Center, which I don't know for certain off the top of my head either.
Can you provide multiple images for a product in Google?
Yes, you can. So you can, if it's called like additional product images or something to that effect. But you can provide additional images as well, which might allow for kind of like a richer experience as that product is featured across our different surfaces, maybe like a gallery view or something to that effect. So if you have additional images that you would like surfaced, would highly recommend that you provide those links as well.
Cool. Sometimes these days you've got videos or even 3D models. Do you happen to know what sorts of data formats that Google Merchant Center accepts?
Really good question. I know that's evolving. To date, I don't believe you can submit videos or richer content such as 3D models via the Content API. You might be able to submit via the Merchant Center front end, but I need to play around a little bit for certain. But I do know this is something that we at Google are kind of actively exploring in terms of how to provide a richer set of experiences to consumers. So if it's not offered today, I would recommend you follow our blogs as we continue to make announcements along these lines.
Cool. Well, I'll keep an eye on the chat, but I'll keep going with some of the other questions we had. You'd mentioned earlier on about some other APIs like Order API, and there's actually quite a few different APIs. Maybe you could just run through it again a little bit more about when you'd care about the different APIs, like what APIs exist and when you would actually use the different APIs.
Sure. So it definitely depends on kind of your use case. So maybe I'll go over some of the more popular APIs and then might talk about when you might use them as well. So there's the Accounts API, which I believe is used to essentially create accounts as well as provide business information around your business. So it might be your business name, website, etc. We have Account Statuses API, which I believe you can pull account level suspension type issues or other issues surrounding your account. We have, the Products API, which has everything to do with inserting products, updating those products, and managing that product information. So that's how you can effectively manage feeds via the Content API. We also have the Orders API, which is more specific to shopping actions. So again, shopping actions is where consumers can actually directly transact on Google properties. I believe it's called Buy with Google, or like that's what the button looks like if you're on Google Shopping right now, just trying to get an understanding what that program might look like from the consumer point of view. But effectively, when someone purchases on shopping actions, that order gets created and gets sent to you, the merchant, via the Merchant Center, as well as you can pull those orders via the Content API. So that's an example if you're just focused on let's say, surfaces across Google and shopping ads, that's probably not an API that you need to touch. But if you do branch out into shopping actions, that might be more important for you. We also have APIs around shipping more local inventory, returns for shopping actions, etc.
Yeah. So one of the things that seems important before you get onto Google Merchant Center is to understand your use case you're trying to support. If you can use Google Merchant Center just to give Google more information about your products, and that actually will now get used also in organic search. So even if you're not paying for a single ad, there can still be benefit in using the feeds to get the structured data across more accurately to Google. Yes, we'll still crawl the site. Yes, we'll try and pull the structured data directly out of the page, but it is just another way of getting data to it, because Google Merchant Center traditionally was only for paid services, but it is now used for organic search as one of the data feeds as well. If you then want to go on to do the ads and the product ads, that's when I'd say be saying the next set of APIs kick in. And then the shopping actions was the third one that you talked about to me, which is you want to sell on Google services rather than just get traffic directed off to your site. That's where your some of the other APIs, like the orders APIs and the returns APIs, become more important. Did I get that correct?
Yep, that is correct.
Cool. Well, we've got another question from the chat. Don't you love these ones? They're completely off the cuff and you've got no idea what they're going to be about. So we got so many weekly sales, and it's hard to keep track of the start and end date of the sales. Can I set the sale price effective date in about a year? Is that okay?
So I don't, to my knowledge, I don't believe you can set like an expiration date within Merchant Center. I'll need to think that through to confirm. We do have a concept called merchant promotions, which I don't believe is supported via the content API, but that does allow you to effectively create sales promotions, buy one, get one free type deals, which is effectively kind of reflected as a kind of like a promotion extension within the ad unit. And so you can set in. I don't know one way or another if those have an expiration component to them. But if you just go in Google search and type in Google Merchant Promotions, you should be able to find more information there on how to set up these promotions. And that may or may not include kind of like an expiration component around that. If your question is more, how do I just update my product pricing data in more kind of real time, that would be a great use case for the content API that allows you to push that information to Google. Again, if hopefully you're not updating you're not updating a product price 5 times a day, because there might be a bit of kind of lag between when you update within the content API versus when that's reflected in the ultimate kind of consumer experience. But hopefully within a matter of hours, you see that data being pulled, processed in our kind of back end, and then reflected in the consumer experience.
Cool. So there's a number of different ways of getting feeds set up, and this might be a slightly sort of tricky question to answer appropriately. But if somebody's trying to decide, should I pay for a service? Should I be trying to do the APIs directly? Should I be trying to do Google Sheets? What sort of criteria do you think they should be using to try and choose between the different ways of getting the feeds into Google Merchant Center? What sort of evaluation criteria would be used? I mean, we can't go on, there's a number of different extensions that somebody had done a little bit of research before, and they found 250 Magento extensions that mentioned Google Merchant Center integration. And so, no, we're not going to go through and review 250 extensions, but how would they choose between the choices, do you think?
I think of course, it depends on your use case a lot. So from a real high level, if you're an individual merchant, let's say with under 100 products, using the Merchant Center front end might be sufficient for you. Maybe depending on how you maintain your products as well. Let's say if you're managing 10 products, you might be able to even create those products directly within Merchant Center and just managing them accordingly there. On the other hand, if you're an individual merchant with, thousands or tens of thousands or beyond offers, you might be looking into a more kind of scaled programmatic solution, which can be, if you have a sophisticated developer team, using them to build your own solution, or using a third party, whether that's an agency, maybe an agency you're already working with, who might be managing your products for other marketplaces or platforms outside Google. Or alternatively, you can look at a third-party integration, either offered directly on these platforms. If you look at the Shopify App Store, Magento Extension Store, those types of things. The evaluation that I'd look at there is, again, just look at the ratings. It's at least one kind of factor just in terms of understanding folks' experiences, looking at what programs they support, and if those match what you're looking for. So if you're looking for shopping actions, do they support shopping actions, order management? If it's pure ads, do they have experience with Google Shopping ads or smart shopping campaigns? So it's a bit of dependency there, and just making sure that they fit your use case. So do they fit kind of your profile of merchants with a similar number of products in the similar location, etc. If on the other hand, you're not an individual merchant, and let's say you're an agency, understanding the number of clients you have, as well as kind of the account management setup that you have. So if you have a large number of clients and things are typically programmatically done, of course, the content API makes a lot of sense. If it's a relatively small number, then perhaps you can get away with kind of doing things in a more manual setup with the account management team. But it does really kind of depend on your setup.
Cool, thank you. We've got another couple of comments in the chat session, which I'll jump to. So just before I bring the next one up, just to be clear, we're not going to be able to share anything on this call that isn't already public information or in forums or the help documentation. We're happy to sort of clarify. But yeah, no, this isn't going to be a rumor channel. We're not permitted to share any internal future plans, but I can bring it up anyway. Is there any truth to the rumor that drop shipping sites and products are no longer allowed on Google Merchant Center or Google Shopping?
To your point, we can't really comment on any future changes. I believe there's no such regulation today, and we'll unfortunately kind of just have to leave it at that. But I haven't. We'll probably just leave things there.
Yeah. So today, no, that is not the case. And there's another question. So the question is, what is your recommendation on organizing the feed? And I'm not quite sure how to answer this question myself, because the feed basically depends on which particular feed. Like there's more than one feed. There is, for example, you've got the product feed. It's got information about individual products. You've got the images and so forth, and then you've got like the locally inventory feeds, which give additional information about this product is available in this location. And so it really depends on which feed, is my understanding as well, in terms of organizing. But the feed is basically a flat list. If I took the product feed, my understanding is the product feed is basically a flat list of products. Is there any structure to it beyond that?
Not my understanding is the same as yours. You can almost just think of these as large spreadsheets. And Google does not really care about kind of the order in which you put your products, etc. So kind of, I would say the summarized recommendation would be provide as much information as you can around your offers to Google within those feeds, whether that be your product feed or local feeds that describe kind of local inventory you might have in a physical store location, but just trying to be as complete as possible.
Yeah, I think the more information, it makes sense, because Google will slot that into category trees and internal data modeling, and search will be doing other information with it. And it's also important to realize that like Google Merchant Center feeds multiple Google offerings. It's not like a single offering that gets fed from it. and each of those offerings. So for example, search uses some of the data from it, ads uses some of the data from it, Google Assistant can even, I think, use some of the data from it. And so all these different sources, there is no one way that the data is used anymore. The Google Merchant Center is like that one point of contact for getting it up for multiple internal Google experiences. And so just it's more important, I think, to get like category information correct than the ordering of the actual feed. And the richer the data, the more Google can do with it. And, even if we said the ways it was getting used today, well, guess what? There's people trying new ideas all the time, and who knows what's going to come out tomorrow and in the future. And so I think it's been one of the struggles sometimes is Google asks for more data to be added to the feed. And it's sort of like, we need the data before we can create a new experience or determine if a new experience is worthwhile. At the same time, it's not always clear how the data can be used. Do you have any other insights on that one, Ben, from your point of view?
No, I think you covered it. I would like to maybe kind of circle back to one of the earlier questions around how to evaluate different options to provide a feed. One common pain point I do find amongst merchants is they find they have to copy paste their product data in like a half dozen different places. So you have your website builder, your Magento Shopify store. You might have other non-Google platforms or marketplaces. You have to submit this data. Google itself. Obviously, we're not officially endorsing any given solution. That's where these third-party integrations can be useful, or using Content API, et cetera. And that oftentimes that does allow you to keep kind of single source of truth data, data kind of repository, which is then submitted across different platforms. So especially if you're a smaller merchant, I do realize it can be kind of challenging, organizing maybe feeds even beyond just Google. If there are other marketplaces or platforms, and keeping track of all that data and making sure everything's consistent and synced, that is where sometimes these third-party integrations can be really useful.
Cool, thank you. We've got another question from the chat, which is related to small merchants. How can small merchants who cannot afford an agency get a Google account rep to help them with GMC account issues?
I'm not an expert in terms of how we, provide help support. I will say if you are having specific challenges and you aren't working with a Google representative today, I would reach out to our help support team. I believe that there's public contact information that you can try reaching out to. But unfortunately, I can't provide kind of any more specific details beyond that.
Yeah, I should add that the purpose of these office hours is really to help developers and trying to understand APIs and data structures and so forth. We're not, on this series, we're not trying to answer all the support questions. But if you've got particular questions and you'd like that you think is worthwhile for you to get answers to, we can bend it, but we might try and get somebody who's more in that side of things. So if you go to the discussion channels, one of the discussion threads there is asking for topics that you'd like covered in future episodes. Feel free to drop it down as a suggestion, because like one of the topics that has come up quite often is around suspensions and policies and so forth and how to get help. Ben is not the expert in that sort of area. And I'm happy to try and see if I can get somebody onto the call in the future. But the focus of these particular calls is around developer experiences for accessing that information. Cool. Well, I've just got one last question, and then we'll see if there's anything else from the chat, and then we'll probably call it a day. Is there anything around Google Shopping related to COVID? With the particular things going on at the moment, is there any particular advice that you would have, or any comments, or are there any new status values that are coming up?
Obviously, I do appreciate this is an incredibly challenging time for many businesses out there. Google is, and things are definitely evolving day by day. Generally speaking, I think there are a number of different Google teams that are actively working to see how we can better support businesses of all different types during this environment. Shopping specifically, obviously, there are different types of search trends going on. So staying on top of those would probably be my first line of advice. Certain categories, for example, luggage is probably in decline right now versus others such as Office supplies of folks, creating the work from home setup, et cetera, might be on the rise. And I don't necessarily have those trends off the top of my head, but I do know there have been a number of account reports that have been published both by Google and other solutions I'd recommend staying on top of, as well as just kind of utilizing some of the tools that we made available through Google Trends, where you can kind of evaluate search trends and insights around assortment, et cetera, that might be available within Merchant Center. Additionally, follow our various blogs. I think we are thinking pretty actively in trying to move quickly in terms of developing solutions specifically around COVID, whether that be for managing your local physical stores or online as well. So I don't have anything kind of specific. I'm not in a position to make any announcements, but definitely recommend paying attention to our blogs and staying on top of the latest trends.
If you were a small business and you were trying to get online for the first time, like you had a store and you're not online at all, is there any? And so they're not going to be an expert. Is there any recommended process you'd go? Like, is it worth them considering Google Merchant Center to get online, or is it more important for them just to get like a Wix site up and just get some product information with a phone number? Like, is there a minimum bar, do you think, that before people should be considering Google Merchant Center?
Yeah. So unofficially, if this were me, first and foremost, I want to make sure that I can appear in searches. And so that would mean, if you have a physical store, you don't already have one, create a Google My Business page. It's where people can find you on Google Maps and other important Google experiences, and you can include information that you would highlight earlier, Alan, around store hours, things of that nature, to promote kind of the current business you already have. If you're venturing into online business for the first time or online sales, you'd probably want to look into creating a storefront for yourself, whether that be through any number of e-commerce platforms, or wherever that might make sense. After that, would look into verifying that site, which I believe provides better insights around, or unlocks potential insights around, organic search. So understanding how your store is appearing, your website's appearing in people's organic unpaid searches. And then maybe at that point, start looking into Merchant Center. And again, we are now experimenting with more kind of unpaid or organic experiences to surface your products. And so if you're just starting off, you're not really sure whether you want to commit to paying for ads, enrolling in all the free solutions, I think is a really good place to start, whether that be Google My Business, or Search Console after you kind of verify your site to get insights around organic search, and then also Merchant Center surfaces across Google. From there, you can always kind of accelerate traffic through paid solutions, but that would be probably my table stakes set of things I would look at.
Yeah, no, I think that was a good list, like Google My Business, just to get your presence online, get your website storefront up. Then as you're getting your advertising, like there's no point trying to drive traffic if your site isn't really in reasonable condition. So there's enough other things to get going. And then Google My Merchant Center is good to then get to help with the traffic going up. Well, we're at the end of time. Thank you very much, Ben, for diving in there and trying to get answers for questions which weren't always the easiest ones. And thank you all for joining the stream and asking questions. I think this makes it a lot more interesting. So if you've got any future topics you want to cover, just go to the discussion area, leave comments there. We will try and get answers to the questions we missed. But also feel free, if there was a question we didn't answer and you really want to get to, feel free to drop it as a comment on one of the existing threads there. Thank you very much for joining. Thanks, Ben.
Thanks, Alan. Thank you, everyone.